Welcome back. What you are about to hear is not a hypothetical war game exercise conducted in some Pentagon basement. What happened in the skies above the Middle East in the past 72 hours represents a rupture in the foundational assumptions of modern aerial warfare. A rupture so complete, so humiliating, and so strategically consequential that the governments in Tel Aviv and Washington are currently doing everything in their power to suppress its full implications from reaching the public. Israel's F-35I Adier, the most expensive, most technologically sophisticated combat aircraft ever mass-produced. The jewel of the IDF's air dominance doctrine, the platform that American defense contractors spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars perfecting, went blind. Not metaphorically blind, operationally, navigationally, lethally blind. Iran's electronic warfare architecture, refined across years of sanctioned isolation and strategic patience, reached out across hundreds of kilometers of contested airspace and severed the GPS lifeline that Israel's entire aerial combat doctrine depends upon. And when those F-35 lost their positioning certainty, they lost everything. Missions were aborted. Strike packages dissolved mid-flight. Pilots operating the most advanced avionics suite in the world suddenly found themselves flying expensive aluminum into an electromagnetic void where coordinates sifted, targeting solutions evaporated, and the safe return corridor became a question mark rather than a certainty. The IDF's air superiority, the strategic cornerstone that has underpinned Israeli military dominance across 7 decades, did not collapse under enemy fire. It collapsed under enemy electrons. Tonight, we are going to tear apart exactly how Iran executed this operation, what it means for the future of aerial warfare, why the F-35 program's most dangerous vulnerability was hiding in plain sight for years, and what the loss of air superiority means for Israel's ability to sustain this conflict at all. We will trace the full chain from Iran's indigenously developed electronic warfare systems to the geopolitical implications of a world where a sanctioned nation just demonstrated it can blind the most advanced air force on Earth without firing a single missile. The truth being suppressed in the briefing rooms of Tel Aviv and Washington tonight is this: the age of GPS-dependent aerial supremacy just ended, and Iran ended it. Before we go further, if this analysis is reaching the depth and honesty that mainstream coverage refuses to provide, hit like, subscribe, and leave your perspective in the comments below. Your support keeps this channel operating at full independence. To understand the magnitude of what Iran accomplished, you first need to understand what the F-35 actually is and what it actually depends on. Western defense marketing has spent 20 years building a mythology around this aircraft. Stealth, sensor fusion, worked warfare, 5th-generation dominance, and in many respects, those capabilities are genuine. The F-35 represents the pinnacle of integrated avionics engineering. Its ability to synthesize radar data, infrared signatures, electronic emissions, and communications intercepts into a single coherent tactical picture for the pilot is genuinely revolutionary. But beneath all of that technological sophistication lies a dependency so fundamental, so deeply embedded in every system aboard the aircraft, that when it is compromised, the entire edifice of F-35 capability begins to crumble. That dependency is GPS. The global positioning system underpins the F-35's navigation architecture, its weapons guidance calculations, its formation coordination protocols, its target handoff procedures between aircraft, and critically, its ability to safely execute the low-altitude, high-speed terrain following flight profiles that constitute its primary strike delivery method. Remove GPS with sufficient precision and persistence, and the F-35 is no longer a 5th-generation strike platform. It becomes an extraordinary, expensive aircraft that its pilot cannot fully trust to be where its instruments say it is. Iran spent years preparing exactly this capability. The electronic warfare architecture that Thrawn activated in the hours before dawn was not improvised. It was the product of a long-term developmental program that combined Russian technical knowledge of GPS signal structure, Chinese expertise in signal processing and jamming waveform design, and Iran's own IRGC electronic warfare commands operational experience accumulated across years of testing against American systems in the Gulf region. The operation began not with jamming, but with something more sophisticated: GPS spoofing at scale. Spoofing is categorically more dangerous than jamming because it is invisible to the target. When a GPS receiver is jammed, the aircraft systems recognize the signal loss and alert the pilot. Emergency navigation protocols activate, the mission profile changes. But when GPS signals are spoofed, when counterfeit positioning data is injected into the receiver with sufficient fidelity, the aircraft systems register nothing abnormal. The navigation suite continues operating. The weapon systems continue calculating. The pilot has no indication that every coordinate his aircraft is processing is a carefully constructed lie. Iranian electronic warfare teams deployed spoofing transmitters across a distributed network of mobile platforms positioned throughout western Iran, eastern Syria, and the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. The network was designed to create an overlapping zone of corrupted GPS signal coverage extending deep into Israeli airspace, a region where F-35 pilots conducting strike missions would fly through a bubble of false coordinates without any system-level warning that their navigation data had been compromised. The first indication that something was catastrophically wrong came from Israeli mission planning centers rather than from aircraft. As the initial wave of F-35 prosecuted their assigned strike corridors, weapons release solutions were generating anomalous results. Precision-guided munitions that should have been tracking cleanly toward pre-assigned aided coordinates were deviating from expected impact points. The sophisticated joint direct attack munitions and small-diameter bombs carried by these aircraft used GPS as their primary guidance input during the terminal phase of flight. When that GPS data is falsified, the weapon follows the false coordinates with perfect fidelity, striking precisely where it was told to go, which is precisely nowhere near the intended target. Mission commanders watching the debrief data understood within minutes that they were dealing with a GPS compromise of unprecedented scale and sophistication, but by the time that recognition propagated through the command chain and aboard orders were transmitted, multiple strike packages had already released ordnance. Some weapons impacted open terrain. Others impacted locations that created serious secondary complications for Israeli operational planning. The strike missions of that night did not destroy Hezbollah infrastructure. They generated confusion, wasted munitions, and exposed the most sensitive vulnerability in Israel's air warfare architecture. Then the jamming began. Once Iran's Electronic Warfare Command assessed that the spoofing phase had achieved maximum confusion within Israeli mission planning, the network shifted modes. Broadband GPS jamming was activated across the same geographic footprint, now deliberately alerting Israeli systems to the signal denial environment. This phase was psychological as much as technical. It forced Israeli air commanders to make an immediate choice: continue operations using degraded inertial navigation systems with sharply reduced accuracy, or stand down and absorb the strategic cost of losing offensive air capacity during a critical operational window. The answer that came back from Israeli command that night was the one that no Western defense planner had publicly admitted was possible. The answer was stand down. F-35 sorties were curtailed. Strike missions were postponed. The aircraft that the Israeli Air Force has treated as the unchallengeable guarantor of its regional dominance were pulled back from the operational envelope where their GPS dependency made them tactically unreliable. For the first time in the modern era, Israel's Air Force lost its ability to project offensive power on its own timeline. Not because enemy fighters intercepted its aircraft, not because surface-to-air missiles denied its airspace, but because an adversary reached into its navigation architecture and made its most advanced weapons untrustworthy. The IDF had lost the air war without a single dogfight. Understanding how Iran built this capability requires confronting a deliberate and sustained Western intelligence failure that spans more than a decade. American, Israeli, and European defense analysts consistently underestimated, and in many documented cases, actively chose to dismiss the depth and sophistication of Iran's electronic warfare development program. The assumption embedded in Western threat assessments was grounded in a form of technological arrogance. A nation under comprehensive economic sanctions, denied access to Western microelectronics, cut off from international defense procurement channels, simply could not develop electronic warfare systems capable of threatening fifth-generation aircraft. That assumption just died in the skies above the Middle East. Iran's electronic warfare capability did not emerge overnight. Its roots trace back to 2011 when Iranian forces captured an American RQ-70 Sentinel reconnaissance drone almost entirely intact. The United States government initially attempted to claim the drone had malfunctioned and crashed. Within weeks, it became apparent that Iranian engineers had executed a GPS spoofing attack that caused the drone's navigation system to believe it was approaching its home base in Afghanistan, while it was actually being guided to a soft landing inside Iranian territory. That single captured platform gave Iranian engineers direct access to American GPS receiver architecture, the signal processing logic that governs navigation systems in American military platforms, and critically, the exact fidelity thresholds that GPS receivers use to authenticate incoming positioning signals. Iranian reverse engineering teams worked on the RQ-70, extracting every technical insight available. What they learned about American GPS dependency informed an entire generation of electronic warfare system development within the IRGC. Over the following decade, Iran developed what military analysts who have subsequently reviewed the evidence are calling a layered GPS denial architecture. A system that operates across multiple modes simultaneously, can be deployed for mobile platforms that are difficult to target and destroy, and is specifically engineered against the GPS signal authentication protocols used in American and Israeli military systems. The Kororo-F, the system is a high-hour spoofing transmitter network operating in the L1 and L2 GPS frequency bands. The specific frequencies used by military-grade GPS receivers in aircraft, like the F-35. Iranian engineers developed what appears to be a signal generation capability that can produce spoofed GPS transmissions with sufficient timing accuracy and signal structure fidelity to defeat the authentication checking built into military GPS receivers. This is not simple jamming. This requires precise knowledge of GPS signal architecture and sophisticated real-time signal generation capability that Western analysts assumed was beyond Iran's technical reach. They were wrong. The navigation denial system is complemented by a broader electronic warfare suite that Iran has deployed across its regional network. The Mersad and Kashef radar systems developed indigenously over the past decade provide Iran with detection and tracking capability against low observable targets, including aircraft with reduced radar cross-sections like the F-35. These systems operate on frequencies and waveform designs that are specifically chosen to exploit the gaps in the F-35's radar warning receiver coverage. When Israeli F-35s entered Iranian electronic warfare coverage zones last night, they were not invisible. They were being tracked by systems specifically engineered to see them, while simultaneously being fed false GPS data that degraded their ability to respond effectively. The satellite dimension is equally critical. Iran's navigation independence from American GPS was sealed through its partnership with Russia's GLN as satellite navigation system and China's Mddow constellation. Iranian military platforms, including the electronic warfare transmitters deployed last night, used navigation derived from Gowanas and BU positioning rather than GPS. This means that while Iranian systems were systematically corrupting Israeli GPS data, their own targeting and positioning systems remained fully operational and fully accurate. Iran was navigating with precision while Israel was flying blind. The asymmetry of that situation on an active battlefield is almost impossible to overstate. The mobile deployment architecture of Iran's electronic warfare network deserves specific attention because it represents the primary reason why Israel has not been able to simply destroy the capability with airstrikes. The transmitter platforms are mounted on heavy military trucks constantly repositioned, operating on pre-planned emission schedules that limit their detectable signature windows to minutes at a time. When Israeli signals intelligence attempts to geolocate an active spoofing transmitter, the platform has typically relocated before a strike mission can be planned and executed. This cat and mouse dynamic has been playing out for months, and Iran has been winning it. What makes the capability even more dangerous is its scalability. The GPS denial architecture that Iran deployed last night against Israeli F-35 operations is not a fixed installation that can be destroyed in the single strike. It is a distributed, mobile, redundant network that can be degraded but not eliminated through conventional air attack. Destroying one node simply shifts the coverage map slightly. The operational effect, the corrupted GPS environment over Israeli airspace, persists. The implications of what Iran demonstrated last night extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation over Israeli airspace. What Tron has proven in live operational conditions against actual F-35 combat missions is that GPS-dependent aerial warfare, the foundational model upon which the entire American military power projection architecture has been built for 30 years, carries a systemic vulnerability that can be exploited by a determined adversary with the right technological investments. This is Washington's nightmare scenario, and it has just become operational reality. The American way of war since the Gulf War of 1991 has been built on a simple foundational concept: precision. GPS-guided munitions replace the carpet bombing doctrine of previous eras, enabling small numbers of aircraft to achieve targeting effects that previously required hundreds of sorties. The F-35, the B-2, the F-22, and the entire family of precision-guided munitions in the American arsenal assume GPS availability as a baseline operational condition. Mission planning software assumes GPS. Logistics coordination assumes GPS. Joint Terminal Attack Controller Communications assumes GPS. The entire integrated joint warfare architecture that makes American military power so lethal assumes that the positioning data flowing through every system is trustworthy. Iran just demonstrated that this assumption can be defeated, not theoretically defeated, operationally defeated, against the most advanced aircraft the United States has ever exported to an ally in an active combat environment, with results that forced a mission stand-down. The Pentagon's response to this demonstration has been characteristically institutional acknowledgement of the challenging electronic warfare environment in classified briefings, followed by silence in public communications. The reasons for this silence are understandable. Publicly acknowledging that Iran has developed GPS denial capabilities sufficient to neutralize F-35 strike operations would trigger a cascade of strategic consequences that Washington is not prepared to manage. Allied nations across Asia and Europe that have purchased or are purchasing F-35 aircraft would immediately begin reassessing the capability guarantees they received during the procurement process. Taiwan and Japan, South Korea, Poland, and a dozen other nations whose defense planning depends on F-35 performance in a GPS-contested environment would be forced to ask uncomfortable questions about what exactly they paid for. The international defense procurement market for American fifth-generation aircraft would face serious turbulence. More immediately, the deterrence calculus in every active theater where American power projection depends on GPS-guided precision strike would need to be recalculated precision strike. If Iran can do this, the analytical question that every serious defense ministry on Earth is now asking is who else can? Russia has been developing GPS denial and spoofing capability for years. The evidence from Ukraine demonstrates Russian electronic warfare teams routinely degrading GPS accuracy for Ukrainian forces. China's electronic warfare investment program is arguably even more sophisticated than Iran's. North Korea has demonstrated GPS jamming capability that has affected civilian aviation in South Korea repeatedly. The answer to the question of who else can execute GPS denial operations against American forces is multiple adversaries in multiple theaters with varying but growing levels of capability. What Iran did last night is not a unique Iranian achievement. It is the most publicly visible demonstration of a vulnerability that American military planners have been quietly acknowledging in classified assessments for years. The American defense establishment's response to this vulnerability has been the development of alternative navigation technologies, inertial navigation system improvements, terrain reference navigation, anti-jam GPS receivers with more sophisticated authentication protocols. Some of these technologies are already being retrofitted into existing platforms, but the timeline for full fleet integration across the F-35 program runs to years, not months. The vulnerability that Iran exploited last night will persist in operational Israeli and American F-35 fleets for a significant period, regardless of whatever emergency technical measures are now being accelerated. In the immediate operational context, Washington is providing Israel with emergency technical guidance on alternative navigation protocols and GPS anti-jam equipment. but the fundamental problem cannot be solved with a firmware update and an emergency equipment delivery. It requires a comprehensive rethinking of how precision aerial warfare is conducted in a GPS-contested environment, and that rethinking will take years to translate into operational doctrine and equipment. Iran took that time away from the equation last night, and Washington is still processing exactly what that means. Israel's military doctrine is built on a specific and carefully calibrated logic, given the Jewish state's geographic reality. A small nation surrounded by adversaries lacking strategic depth, with the civilian population concentrated in a narrow coastal corridor. The IDF has always understood that it cannot afford to fight long wars of attrition. Every conflict must be ended quickly, decisively, and on terms that restore deterrence for the next confrontation. The instrument that makes this rapid, decisive warfare doctrine possible is air power. Israel's Air Force has historically served as a great equalizer. Israel's Air Force has historically served as a great equalizer. The capability that allows a small nation to project force far beyond its borders, strike targets deep inside adversary territory, and create the conditions for rapid ground operations by eliminating enemy air defense logistics and command infrastructure before infantry and armor ever cross a line of departure. For this doctrine to work, Israel's Air Force must be able to operate freely. It must be able to plan strikes with confidence, execute them with precision, then achieve the effects that justify the enormous investment in fifth-generation aircraft and precision munitions, lose that freedom of operation, lose the ability to strike with confidence, and the entire rapid, decisive warfare architecture collapses. Iran just collapsed it. When Israeli F-35s cannot be trusted to navigate accurately, cannot release weapons with confidence that they will strike intended targets, and must be pulled back from operational strike envelopes to protect them from mission failure and potential loss. Israel's military doctrine enters a state of paralysis that its adversaries have been working toward for years. Hezbollah can continue launching rockets from Lebanon without fear of the precise, sustained Israeli air interdiction campaign that would normally suppress the threat within days. Iranian-linked forces in Syria can continue operating logistics routes that would normally be targeted by Israeli air power operating under full GPS reliability. The entire architecture of Israeli forward deterrence, the ability to reach out and strike any target anywhere in the region with confidence and precision, is currently degraded. The psychological dimension of this paralysis compounds the tactical one. Israeli society and the Israeli political establishment have been conditioned by decades of IDF performance to expect rapid, decisive military results. When the Air Force cannot deliver those results, when missions are aborted, when strike packages are pulled back, when the morning news cannot report successful strikes against enemy infrastructure, the political pressure on the war cabinet intensifies rapidly. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the security cabinet are now facing a situation where the military instrument they have relied upon most heavily is operating at reduced effectiveness against an adversary that is not reducing its own offensive pressure. Reheat rocket campaigns continue. Iranian-supplied precision missiles continue reaching Israeli territory. The GPS degradation that is limiting F-35 effectiveness is not affecting Hezbollah's launch operations. Their weapons use inertial guidance and terrain matching rather than GPS. Specifically because Iranian weapons designers anticipated exactly this kind of navigation warfare environment and designed their export weapons accordingly. Israel is absorbing incoming fire while its primary counterbatter instrument is grounded or operating at significantly reduced effectiveness. This is not a situation that the Israeli war cabinet can sustain politically or militarily for an extended period. The options being discussed in Tel Aviv's emergency sessions are all painful. Continuing to fly F-35 missions with degraded navigation means accepting reduced strike accuracy and the risk of high-profile mission failures that would further damage deterrence credibility. Shifting to older F-15 and F-16 aircraft that use different navigation systems and are less GPS-dependent provides partial relief but sacrifices the stealth and sensor fusion capabilities that the F-35 brings. Requesting emergency American intervention to suppress Iranian electronic warfare transmitters requires committing American forces more deeply than Washington's current risk calculus appears to support. None of these options restore the strategic situation to the baseline that existed before Iran activated its GPS denial network. The damage to Israeli air power doctrine is not a problem that can be solved this week. It is a structural recalibration of what Israeli air power can and cannot do in a conflict against an adversary with sophisticated electronic warfare capability. And that recalibration has implications that extend far beyond the current fight. What Iran demonstrated in the skies above the Middle East last night is being analyzed not only in Tel Aviv and Washington, but in every serious defense ministry on Earth. The strategic significance of this demonstration cannot be reduced to its immediate tactical outcomes. What TAN has shown is that the technological monopoly on advanced warfare capability that the United States and its allies have held since the end of the Cold War is no longer absolute, and that the pathway to challenging that monopoly runs not through expensive aircraft carriers and ballistic missile programs, but through precisely targeted investments in the electromagnetic spectrum. Electronic warfare is the great equalizer of 21st century military competition. It does not require massive industrial capacity. It does not require the kind of advanced manufacturing base that produces fifth-generation aircraft. It requires deep technical knowledge of adversary systems, sophisticated software engineering capability, and the strategic patience to develop and refine capabilities across years of iterative testing. All of these are things that a sanctioned nation with a strong engineering culture and a clear strategic objective can develop, and Iran has now proven that definitively. The implications for global power competition are profound. Russia has been watching the Iranian demonstration with close professional attention. Moscow's own electronic warfare programs are more advanced than Thrawn's, and the operational lessons from Iranian GPS denial operations against F-35 will be incorporated into Russian doctrine for potential conflict in European theaters. Chinese defense analysts are equally attentive. Beijing's investment in electronic warfare and space-based navigation denial capability has been substantial and sustained, and the Iranian proof of concept against American GPS-dependent systems validates the strategic logic of TAD investment. The United States is now confronting a world in which its military power projection model, built on the assumption of GPS availability across every theater, faces credible denial threats from multiple adversaries simultaneously. This is not a problem that can be solved by building more F-35. It requires a fundamental architectural rethinking of how American and allied military power is structured, equipped, and operated. For smaller nations in the developing world that have been watching this conflict, the Iranian demonstration carries a different but equally significant message. The path to credible self-defense against technologically superior adversaries does not require matching them platform for platform. It requires identifying the dependencies that make advanced platforms vulnerable and investing in the capability to exploit those dependencies. GPS denial, cyber operations, anti-satellite weapons, and electromagnetic spectrum control are all instruments that a determined nation can develop at a fraction of the cost of the platforms they can neutralize. Iran has written a strategic manual last night, and it will be read carefully in Pyongyang, in Karakus, and Harare, in every capital where government is trying to figure out how to defend its sovereignty against potential American military pressure. The lesson is stark and clear. Find the dependency, attack the dependency, and the most expensive military machine in history can be made to malfunction. The Gulf Cooperation Council states are watching these developments with profound anxiety. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have all made enormous investments in American military equipment.